There is a quiet power that lives in a woman who no longer seeks to be chosen. She does not demand love, she attracts it. Not through words, not through effort, but through the calm alignment of her inner world. This may feel counterintuitive, especially in a culture where we're taught to do more, say more, offer more, hoping to be noticed, hoping to be valued. But in reality, neuroscience, ancient philosophy, and human behavior all point to the same truth: presence is more powerful than persuasion. When a woman learns to regulate her nervous system, she begins to shift her energy field. And whether a man understands it consciously or not, he feels that shift. He becomes drawn, not to a performance, but to an essence. There is no manipulation here, no tactic, no need to pretend. Instead, what you're about to learn is a back to your center, a path where self-respect becomes your fragrance, where silence becomes your strategy, where emotional clarity becomes your compass. The woman who lives in this state does not chase. She is chased not because she plays games, but because she no longer abandons herself. Welcome to She Mindset, your space for calm wisdom-based guidance on self-mastery and relationships. Remember the name of our channel, She Mindset, the only official source of calm, wisdom-based guidance. Beware of fake channels copying our voice. Stay aware. Stay true. Let us begin. There is something quietly powerful about a woman who no longer responds to everything that tries to provoke her. Her strength lies not in resistance, but in her ability to remain unmoved when her emotions are stirred. And yet, this stillness is not apathy. It is clarity. It is not silence out of fear, but composure rooted in wisdom. In relationships where words and emotions often spiral into misunderstanding, a woman who chooses not to react impulsively becomes like a calm lake that reflects everything around it. She does not echo the chaos brought to her. She observes it, sees through it, and responds, if at all, from a space that cannot be touched by the storms of another. Neuroscience offers us a simple yet profound understanding here. The brain is composed of many layers, but two regions often fight for control during emotional conflict: the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. The amygdala, the center of fear, triggers our fight or flight response. It reacts without thinking, interpreting everything as a potential threat. But the prefrontal cortex, the seat of rational decision, making and emotional regulation, is slower, more deliberate. The more we train ourselves to pause, to breathe, to reflect, the more we shift power away from the amygdala and into the hands of clarity. This is not about being passive. It's about learning that silence is not weakness and stillness is not submission. When a man says something to provoke a reaction, whether consciously or unconsciously, and the woman he's speaking to doesn't flinch, doesn't fight, doesn't chase his approval, something in him shifts. He sees her energy is not reactive, but grounded. He feels that she cannot be pulled off center. And that, strangely, makes her more compelling. Let me share a moment with you from an older couple I once observed in a quiet tea house nestled in the mountains. The man, growing frustrated with the long wait for their tea, began to complain. His voice was loud enough to carry, and his energy was growing restless. The woman, his partner, didn't interrupt him, didn't match his agitation. She simply looked out of the window, watching the clouds drift slowly past the peaks. She smiled gently to herself, her hands resting calmly in her lap. Her stillness did not mock him, it invited him into peace. A few minutes later, his voice softened. He grew quiet. Then he said, "It's beautiful here, isn't it?" The complaint had dissolved into calm, because her stillness held space for him to return to himself. This is how emotional maturity becomes influence. You do not have to change people. You must simply stop letting their energy change you. In a romantic dynamic, this becomes even more potent. Men are not wired to be attracted to volatility, though many confuse it with passion. In truth, what holds a man's attention over time is the woman who evokes safety and mystery at once. A woman whose presence says, "I do not chase chaos, I dwell in peace. You are welcome here, but I do not need you to define me." She becomes a mirror, not a sponge. She reflects back the other without absorbing their turbulence. This, too, is supported by physiology. The human nervous system is relational. Through a process called co-regulation, our bodies respond unconsciously to the emotional states of those around us. A dysregulated partner will often seek to draw you into their storm. But when your nervous system is regulated, when your breath is deep and your voice low, and your posture unshaken, you are not only protecting your peace, you are resetting the environment around you. You become the thermostat, not the thermometer. In moments of conflict, you do not always need the right words. You only need the right presence. You do not need to win the argument. You only need to master your state. The man who once provoked you into reactions may now find himself leaning in, curious, drawn not to what you say, but to what you don't say, to the energy you carry, to the mystery of a woman who does not explain herself, who does not need to prove her worth, who lets silence speak for her. A story comes to mind of a young woman named Lena. She had always been reactive in her relationships, always quick to defend, to justify, to argue when misunderstood. She thought that by clarifying herself repeatedly, she would be seen and loved more deeply. But it always led to exhaustion. One day, after yet another emotional exchange with her partner, she sat alone in her room and asked herself, "Why do I feel so tired?" The answer came not as a thought, but as a realization she had been trying to control the other person's perception. The next time her partner grew agitated and accused her of being distant, she didn't explain. She didn't correct him. She simply listened, then said calmly, "I hear that you feel that way." Nothing more. He waited for a fight. She gave him stillness, and that stillness unsettled him, not in a negative way, but in a revealing way. He was forced to see his own patterns because she was no longer participating in them. This is the beginning of magnetism, not the superficial kind based on looks or charm, but the deep kind that emanates from self-awareness. When you stop giving away your emotional energy to every passing mood or opinion, you become centered in your own essence. You walk into a room and change its temperature, not by effort, but by frequency. And this leads us into something equally powerful: what your body says about your self-worth before you even speak. Long before a word escapes your lips, your body has already told a story. The position of your shoulders, the tilt of your head, the softness or tightness in your breath, all of these are cues. They tell others whether you see yourself as enough. They send signals, silently but powerfully, that inform how others engage with you. This is not about posing or pretending. This is about embodiment, confidence that is rooted in your physiology. When your nervous system is balanced, when your breathing is steady and your spine upright, not rigid but alive, you move differently. You look into someone's eyes without needing to convince. You smile not to gain approval, but because you are in harmony with yourself, and others feel this. They may not know why they are drawn to you. They may not be able to articulate it, but they feel it. The vagus nerve, which runs from your brainstem down through your heart and into your abdomen, plays a major role here. It's responsible for regulating your parasympathetic nervous system, your rest and digest state. When your vagal tone is strong, you are more resilient under stress, more attuned to social connection, more radiant in your energy. You are perceived as safe, trustworthy, and confident, not because of what you say, but because your body is sending those messages constantly, in every moment, without needing words. A man who meets a woman with this kind of embodied presence feels something rare. He feels like he can relax around her, not because she is pleasing or agreeable, but because she is not trying to prove anything. And because she is not trying to perform, he feels safe being himself. This opens the door to real intimacy, to the kind of connection that cannot be faked or forced. In one conversation with a psychologist who worked extensively with couples, she shared that the most common complaint from men in long-term relationships was not that their partner wasn't attractive, but that she was always tense. The tension was not physical, it was energetic. It came from years of unresolved emotions, overthinking and over-functioning. The body had become a reflection of inner chaos. And the man, though he couldn't explain it in therapeutic terms, had subconsciously pulled away, not from her, but from her nervous system. Contrast this with a story from an older man who'd been married for over 40 years. When asked what kept his love alive, he smiled and said, "She never loses her breath, even when I do. She breathes through everything." What he was describing was not poetic, it was physiological. It was her ability to remain grounded through breath, through posture, through presence. And that groundedness gave their relationship a foundation. When a woman learns to carry herself with this embodied awareness, she naturally becomes more attractive. Not in the way society markets attraction, through trends or perfection, but in a far deeper way. She becomes attractive in the way a candle flame is to someone who has been sitting in the dark. She offers warmth without grasping, light without blinding, presence without pressure. This is not something you can fake. It is something you cultivate. Each time you take a deep breath instead of reacting. Each time you stand tall instead of collapsing inward. Each time you bring your awareness to your body instead of letting your mind run wild. You are training yourself to live in your center, to radiate calm. And this calmness over time becomes a form of beauty that no makeup, no clothing, no external validation can replicate. There is an old Eastern saying, if the flower does not chase the bee, it blooms and the bee comes. This is the essence of what you're learning now. When you act from this space of non-reactivity and embodied confidence, you are no longer strategizing how to make someone chase you. You are simply becoming the kind of person who inspires pursuit, not because you withhold love, but because you radiate it from a place of wholeness. To the woman who learns this, life changes. Relationships deepen. Words become fewer, but more meaningful. Her body becomes her sanctuary, not her battlefield. And the man who enters her life does not stay because she chases, explains, or pleases. He stays because he cannot find elsewhere the peace she carries within her. There comes a moment in every woman's life when she realizes that speaking more does not always lead to being understood. She begins to sense that explaining herself repeatedly does not bring closeness, but slowly erodes her sense of peace. And in that quiet realization, she makes a subtle but profound shift. She begins to protect her energy, not with harshness, but with stillness. She stops trying to teach others how to treat her with words and instead allows her boundaries to become invisible walls, felt, not announced. There is a kind of presence that communicates everything without needing to be loud. It is the presence of a woman who honors herself without fanfare. She doesn't explain why she no longer replies immediately. She doesn't justify why she says no. She doesn't over-apologize for her needs or make others comfortable at the expense of her inner truth. She simply acts from alignment, and those who are attuned feel the shift. In relationships, especially romantic ones, we often believe that transparency and explanation are the highest forms of connection. But there is a deeper intelligence at play, one that doesn't operate through verbal persuasion, but through energetic clarity. A woman who sets boundaries without raising her voice, without drama, without threat. She is felt more deeply than any woman who screams or begs to be heard. Her presence says, "This is what I allow. This is what I do not, and I do not need to debate that." From a psychological lens, this is the difference between external and internal validation. A woman who requires others to understand and agree with her before she feels justified is living externally. Her center is outside herself, but a woman who moves silently with self-respect is internally grounded. She does not ask for permission to be respected. She embodies it. There is a term in behavioral science called non-verbal dominance. It doesn't mean aggression or control. It refers to how we can assert influence through posture, stillness, and tone. A person with non-verbal dominance does not need to argue. Their energy creates a perimeter, and it is not power through fear, it is power through self-possession. A story comes to mind of an elegant woman named Farah. She was in her late 40s, deeply intuitive, and had spent many years in relationships where she over-explained everything. Every time she said no, she followed it with long paragraphs. Every time she was hurt, she tried to fix the misunderstanding by saying more, expressing more, hoping her vulnerability would be received with grace. But often, her emotional labor was dismissed. One day, something shifted. A man she was seeing canceled their plans for the third time without notice. Normally, she would have written a careful message expressing her disappointment and asking him to consider her feelings. But this time, she simply didn't respond. She waited, not out of game playing, but because she had nothing left to give to someone who didn't meet her where she was. Days later, he reached out, apologetic. But it wasn't her silence that taught him. It was her self-honoring energy. She wasn't punishing him. She had simply withdrawn her presence. This is the silent boundary. It does not attack or defend. It doesn't seek revenge. It simply says, "I will not stay where I am not seen." And the beauty of such a boundary is that it teaches others through feeling, not force. It creates a natural filter. Those who are emotionally intelligent respond with respect. Those who aren't reveal themselves more quickly. This approach is not about being cold or indifferent. It is about knowing the value of your attention, your care, your nurturing energy. When you give it freely to anyone, it becomes diluted. When you give it selectively, it becomes sacred. And sacred energy does not beg to be honored. It simply withdraws where it is not. Even neuroscience confirms this truth. Human beings are wired to respond to energetic cues before verbal ones. Mirror neurons in the brain allow us to reflect the emotional states of others. When a woman is grounded in her boundaries, people feel it in their nervous system. They cannot always name it, but they are aware of it. It commands behavior without confrontation. Imagine two people walking into a room. One enters quietly, but her energy is spacious, dignified. She doesn't speak much, but her eyes are clear. Her posture is relaxed yet tall. The other is louder, explaining her presence, trying to be liked, trying to belong. Which one do people respect more? Often, the first, not because of appearance, but because of the way she carries herself. She is not asking to be included. She already knows she belongs where she is aligned. And if the space is not aligned, she leaves. This is a lesson many women learn only after they have been drained. After giving and giving until they have nothing left. But once they begin to understand that love does not require depletion, they begin to build quiet walls made of awareness. Not walls to keep love out, but to keep self-betrayal in check. In romantic relationships, this shifts everything. A man does not need a woman to prove herself. He needs a woman who knows herself. And the more she anchors into that knowing, the less she needs to explain her boundaries. They are felt like an invisible line that cannot be crossed without consequence. Not a threat, but a natural law. This leads us to another equally powerful truth: emotional mystery. The mind is drawn to what it cannot fully understand. This is not about manipulation. It is about restraint. In a world of constant sharing, a woman who speaks less, reveals less, and expresses with mindful presence becomes irresistible, not because she's hiding something, but because she honors the sacredness of her emotions. Modern culture teaches us to reveal everything quickly, to tell our story, to explain our trauma, to share our thoughts before they're fully formed. But ancient wisdom and modern psychology agree on this: what is slowly revealed is more deeply valued. In romantic dynamics, this becomes an essential principle. When a man feels he already knows everything about a woman within the first few encounters, his brain stops engaging in the reward-seeking behavior that fuels romantic interest. This is not because he is shallow. It is biology. The dopamine system in the brain thrives on anticipation. If everything is given too soon, emotionally, physically, energetically, there is no space for the reward system to stay active. The most attractive women are not necessarily the most beautiful or expressive. They are the ones who create space for curiosity. They do not overshare. They do not perform emotional nudity. They reveal their depth slowly as trust is built, not because they are guarded, but because they understand the value of emotional intimacy. A woman named Liana illustrates this perfectly. She had a natural warmth about her, and when men met her, they immediately felt seen. But she didn't share much about herself at first. She listened. She observed. She didn't rush to fill silence. When asked about her past, she smiled and said, "Some things are better discovered in time." That single sentence would spark curiosity that lasted months. Men would try to know her more, not because she was unavailable, but because she wasn't fully predictable. Every time she shared something about herself, it felt like a gift, not a transaction. That is emotional mystery, and it keeps relationships alive long after the newness has faded. This is not about withholding affection or playing games. It is about pacing. The same way you don't serve a 5-course meal all at once. You don't offer the fullness of your soul to someone who hasn't shown they can hold it. Think of relationships like music. The pauses between the notes are what give the music meaning. Without silence, there is no rhythm. Without mystery, there is no allure. A woman who speaks with intention, who knows when to pause, who doesn't rush to be understood. That woman creates a melody others want to keep hearing. Psychologically, we call this the uncertainty principle in attraction. The brain remains activated in desire when it's unsure of an outcome. That doesn't mean creating insecurity. It means allowing space for discovery. And it applies emotionally just as much as it does physically. When a man knows that a woman is not an open book, that her layers unfold with time, with trust, with presence, he stays engaged. His masculine energy is stirred, not because she is distant, but because she is sacred. There's a quote often shared in spiritual circles: "The deeper the roots, the quieter the tree." This speaks to the power of emotional depth expressed with restraint. A woman who has done her inner work is not loud about it. She simply lives it. Her presence reveals more than her words ever could, and that presence draws people toward her. There was a time when vulnerability was confused with oversharing, but real vulnerability is not about exposure. It is about truth offered in safety. When a woman knows herself, she does not seek connection by bleeding in public. She offers her story like a soft invitation, not a scream for recognition. A man who meets a woman like this feels something rare. He feels invited, not overwhelmed. He feels intrigued, not responsible. She does not expect him to carry her emotions. She carries them herself and offers him only what is needed in the moment. And in that simplicity, he finds comfort. The woman who understands this does not fear being misunderstood. She knows that the right man will be patient enough to learn her language. She knows that her silence will be read correctly, not as disinterest, but as depth. And she knows that what is real does not require urgency. So she slows down. She does not rush connection. She lets it unfold. And in doing so, she becomes the kind of woman a man doesn't just want to chase. He feels honored to be chosen by. Not because she played a game, but because she lived from her center. There is a quiet truth that many women discover after years of emotional exhaustion. The more you try to lead in a relationship, the more you begin to feel that you are the only one holding it together. Not because you are too strong or too capable, but because somewhere along the way, you were conditioned to believe that being proactive, fixing everything, and taking control is the only way to be loved or respected. And yet, the very act of over-functioning begins to suffocate your inner softness. You lose your ability to simply receive. What most women are never taught is that there is a natural power in yielding, not yielding out of weakness or submission, but yielding as a conscious return to your original nature. The receptive force, the yin principle. In many ancient traditions, this is the feminine essence, not as a gendered identity, but as a universal quality. The yin does not push, it draws. It does not chase, it magnetizes. It does not shout, it listens deeply and speaks only when the energy is right. In romantic relationships, the consequences of abandoning this inner alignment are often subtle but destructive. When a woman constantly leads the emotional direction of the relationship, initiates all the conversations, plans all the meetings, solves all the problems, she begins to step into masculine polarity, not because she is wrong to be strong, but because the dance between masculine and feminine depends on balance. When one partner becomes too dominant in direction, the other either submits passively or withdraws completely. A woman named Ilara once shared her experience with this. She had always been the planner in her relationships, the one who texted first, arranged all the dates, reminded her partner of important occasions, initiated the serious talks. She believed that being thoughtful and proactive was her strength, and it was. But over time, she began to notice something painful. Her partners grew more passive. They became less engaged, less emotionally invested, and increasingly dependent on her energy to keep the relationship alive. And when she finally stopped trying, they disappeared. At first, she thought this was their failure, but then she saw a pattern. She had been leading because she didn't trust that love could flow without her control. She had become a manager of relationships, not a receiver of love. This realization did not make her smaller, it made her wiser. She began to practice something radically simple: allowing. She allowed herself to not initiate. She allowed silence without panic. She allowed the man to lead, even if he stumbled. And slowly, she discovered something powerful. Her presence invited a different kind of energy from men. Those who were passive fell away. But those who were ready to rise did. There is a physiological truth behind this shift. Human relationships operate through polarity, just like magnets. Masculine energy, in its natural state, seeks direction, freedom, and purpose. Feminine energy seeks connection, presence, and receptivity. When both are balanced, there is flow. But when the feminine tries to direct the masculine, the polarity reverses, and the result is resistance, resentment, or retreat. This is not about reverting to outdated roles. It's about recognizing energy. When a woman softens, not in her boundaries, but in her energy, she creates space for the masculine to emerge. And this space is not weakness. It is the highest form of intelligence. It is the art of moving without forcing. From a neuroscience perspective, the brain's chemistry responds differently to giving and receiving. When a woman is always giving, always fixing, she triggers the release of stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, even if she feels she is being productive. But when she steps into receptivity, into trust, into stillness, she activates oxytocin, the bonding hormone, the softening agent. And this shift not only makes her feel more connected to herself, but it also draws others toward her. A man may not consciously understand this. He may not know how to explain why he is drawn to a woman who doesn't chase him, doesn't control him, but simply allows him to show up. He just feels it. He feels a quiet invitation to be a better version of himself, not because she pushes him, but because she leaves room for him to step in. There's a story told in an Eastern monastery about a woman who came to the temple every day to pray for her husband to become more attentive and loving. Day after day, she asked the monks to teach her a mantra to help change him. Finally, the head monk handed her a bowl of water and said, "Hold this, but do not move." She stood still. Hours passed. Her hands ached, her back stiffened, but she didn't spill the water. When the monk returned, he looked into her eyes and said, "That is your mantra. Hold your stillness. Let the ripples come from him. If you chase the ripple, the water will always spill." The metaphor is clear. In every relationship, one person must hold the stillness for the other to rise. And when the woman does this, not through silence as suppression, but silence as strength, she becomes the sacred mirror through which the man sees himself. This is the essence of anchored femininity. It is not a performance. It is a return. A return to the part of you that knows you do not need to control everything to be safe. A return to the truth that your presence is enough when you stop chasing outcomes and instead become the space in which connection can unfold. You change the entire emotional rhythm of your relationship. Many women have been taught that to be respected, they must be hard. That to be loved, they must be perfect. That to be chosen, they must be always available, always giving. But love does not thrive in control. It blooms in invitation. And invitation requires trust. Trust in yourself. Trust in the unknown. Trust in the idea that if you lean back and let go, what is meant for you will lean in. One woman, Maya, a therapist who worked with couples for decades, observed that the women who struggled most in love were not those who lacked beauty or intelligence. They were the ones who had learned to survive through control. Their feminine energy had been buried under years of overperformance. And every time they entered a relationship, they brought their strategy with them: initiate, organize, fix, manage. But in doing so, they never left room for the other to lead, to offer, to pursue. She began to guide her clients to experiment with softening, not to become passive, but to practice letting go, to sit in a conversation without rushing to fill the silence, to allow a man to experience discomfort without immediately rescuing him, to make space for offers to arise instead of always planning. The results were transformational, not because the women became someone else, but because they returned to the version of themselves that had never been allowed to fully breathe. Releasing control in relationships is not easy. It requires unlearning. It requires courage to trust that you are worthy even when you are not performing. But it is in this release that something sacred happens. You become a safe space, not only for the man, but for yourself. Energetically, this shifts your entire field. The frequency of control is tight, fast, contracted. The frequency of allowing is open, slow, expansive. People feel this difference. A woman who leads from yin energy walks slower, speaks with more breath, listens with her whole body. She doesn't rush intimacy. She waits, not because she is afraid, but because she honors unfolding. The modern world does not reward this slowness. It teaches speed, results, action. But love is not born from urgency. It is born from presence. And presence cannot be forced. It must be allowed. A man once described the woman he fell in love with as the calm in my storm. He didn't say she fixed his problems. He didn't say she told him what to do. He said she gave him a place to land when he was tired of leading. That is what anchored femininity offers, not through effort, but through presence. In your own life, this begins with small choices. When your partner seems distant, do you immediately confront, or do you pause and observe? When something feels uncertain, do you try to control the outcome, or do you trust that clarity will come with time? When you feel the urge to fix, can you instead breathe into the space and simply be? This is not about passivity. It is about strategic stillness. When you lead from yin energy, you are not waiting. You are listening. You are attuned. You are receptive without being dependent. And in that space, your intuition grows. You stop reacting and start responding. You stop chasing and start attracting. A flower does not run after the sunlight. It simply opens, and the sun finds it. This is not poetic fantasy. It is the natural order of energy. What is open receives. What is tense resists. When you soften, you signal to the universe and to the man who meets you that you are no longer fighting the flow. You are embodying it, and that embodiment is magnetic, not because it promises something, but because it reveals something. A woman who trusts herself is unforgettable. She is not desperate for validation. She does not panic in silence. She does not rush connection. She simply actually is, and that being invites others to rise, not through pressure, but through resonance. So if you find yourself tired of leading, tired of overgiving, tired of managing connection, ask yourself, what would it feel like to allow? What would it feel like to let your softness speak louder than your strategy? What would it feel like to stop performing and start receiving? You do not have to do more. You have to become more still, not static, but present, not passive, but powerful. The kind of power that does not need to be proven, the kind of power that breathes. And when you begin to live in that space, anchored, soft, surrendered, you will find that those who are meant for you will step forward. Not because you chased them, but because you left the space for them to arrive. A woman who walks into a room like she is already loved does not need to prove herself. She does not need to announce her value, exaggerate her charm, or bend herself to be seen. Her presence is complete, not because someone else affirms it, but because her energy no longer seeks validation. And this is the paradox. When a woman carries herself as if she is already deeply loved, she becomes the kind of woman others want to love deeply. Most people think that love is something you receive from another. In reality, it is something you generate within and then allow to flow outward. When a woman learns how to activate that inner current, the entire landscape of her relationships begins to shift. Her posture changes. Her silence speaks. Her eyes reflect a sense of settledness that is not easily shaken. And the man who sees her feels it, not on the surface of things, but in the subtle realm where attraction begins long before words are spoken. There is a saying in Zen, how you do anything is how you do everything. The same is true in love. A woman who rushes, begs, fears, clings, or constantly questions her worth is reflecting the way she has learned to treat herself. But a woman who pauses before she replies, who guards her peace like a queen guards her kingdom, and who speaks only when her words serve truth, she moves like a person who knows she is already claimed by something greater than any man's attention. She has been claimed by her own inner knowing. That is the essence of deep self-love. And from that place, Everything she touches carries a different charge. This state of being, where one walks as if already loved, is not theatrical. It is not a performance or an attitude meant to manipulate outcomes. It is a neurological shift, a psychological calibration, a form of emotional and spiritual alignment. In neuroscience, this is called embodied cognition. Your mind believes what your body consistently enacts. And your body, in turn, responds to the beliefs your mind repeatedly entertains. So when a woman consistently behaves as though she is loved, treasured, and chosen, not by fantasy, but by emotional discipline, her nervous system begins to recalibrate. Her cortisol levels decrease. Her breath slows. She becomes more receptive and less reactive. And men, being intuitive to energy more than words, feel that serenity. They may not know what is different about her, but they know they want to be near it. She emits safety, not neediness. Warmth, not demand. Strength, not control. One woman once shared that after years of dating disappointments, she began every morning with a ritual. Before leaving her home, she would stand before the mirror and say, "You are already loved. You are chosen by life. You are exactly where you need to be." At first, it felt silly, mechanical, but over time, her body responded. She stopped trying to impress. Her voice softened. Her laugh became freer, and the kinds of men she attracted began to change, not because the world outside had shifted, but because the signal she was sending had transformed. In psychology, we know that the subconscious mind does not differentiate between what is real and what is imagined. It simply accepts what is repeated. So, when a woman lives in alignment with the energy of being loved, cherished, respected, her subconscious begins to believe this as her truth. Her patterns shift. She no longer tolerates confusion, emotional starvation, or men who are only half present. Not because she is bitter or superior, but because she no longer aligns with the vibration of scarcity. And that subtle boundary becomes a magnetic force. She no longer chases because she no longer needs what she once thought was missing. And that is when the chase begins. Not from her, but toward her. There's a physics to energy. Scarcity repels. Abundance attracts. When a woman moves through life as if she is waiting for someone to fill her, she unconsciously emits lack. Her words may be confident, but her energy leaks anxiety. On the other hand, when she operates from fullness, even her silence becomes compelling. Her pauses carry weight. Her detachment becomes sacred, not cold. She is not unreachable. She is just rooted. Consider the lotus flower. It grows in murky waters. Its roots are buried in the dark, and yet it rises untouched by the mud, opening only when the sun touches it. This is the metaphor for a woman who has learned to walk as if already loved. Her past may be chaotic. Her heart may have been broken many times, but she has chosen not to carry the mud into her presence. She blooms from it, and not everyone deserves to see her petals open. In the Eastern tradition, there is a quiet reverence for that which is inwardly centered. The masters teach that the more still the mind, the more powerful the presence. A woman who has mastered her emotional energy does not react to every stimulus. She has trained herself to observe before responding. She no longer interprets silence as rejection, nor delay as disinterest. She allows, she receives, and this receptivity is not passivity, it is intelligence. It is how she protects her peace while allowing life to come to her. This inner composure is not born out of arrogance, but awareness. It is the product of many silent battles. She has cried alone. She has doubted her worth. She has watched men walk away and wondered if something in her was broken. But through those experiences, she began to understand something deeper. She was never meant to beg for what aligns naturally. And when she finally learned how to sit with her own silence, she discovered something unexpected. It was not empty. It was sacred. When a man meets a woman who has cultivated herself in this way, he does not meet only her smile or her appearance. He meets her stillness. He senses that she is not seeking anything from him. She is simply present, and in that presence, he either rises or retreats, not because she demands it, but because the energy demands